Sounds good.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for another R-LadiesGaborone event. We have Karishma, Lemlem, Aaron, and Tim with us from the USAID, I think. Yeah, they'll be giving us a tutorial on how to use different R packages to create beautiful data visualization. So I'm going to let Karishma and Lemlem take over.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. Thank you all for joining today. So we're really excited to take you through an exercise in transforming, these standard Excel default plots that we might see in our day-to-day lives or in reports that we come across for work, into something that might be a little bit more impactful and engaging using the power of R and ggplot. So today we'll walk through a couple, key data visualization principles, and how to apply them in R to really make these visuals, these cluttered visuals, more simplified and make data-driven insights stand out. To give you a little bit of background on our work, both Lemlem, Aaron, Tim, and I, and a couple other colleagues on the line, work within the Office of HIV/AIDS at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And our work supports PEPFAR, which is a $6 billion HIV/AIDS program. So our team at USAID analyzes and synthesizes and visualizes large amounts of monitoring and evaluation data across 55 different countries every quarter, of which Botswana is one. So that's a lot of data and context to cover to ultimately communicate out data-driven insights and inform some of the programmatic decisions that are happening to move the needle towards ending HIV as a public health threat globally. So a key part of this is communication to a lot of various different stakeholders. So that's communication internally within USAID to our country governments that we support across the world, and also to the US government and reporting back up to Congress. So I'm going to walk us through a quick example that our team came across a couple years ago of a figure that was included in a 2021 report to Congress right here. So this is the figure H. And in this 118-page document, there was one particular section on how PEPFAR was doing in terms of transitioning our fundings from international partners to local partners to implement HIV/AIDS programming. So there was an accompanying quote with this visual, and I'm going to just zoom in a little bit so everyone can see it. And the quote was, in 2018, PEPFAR announced the goal of funding 70% of its program directly through local organizations, including partner or country governments, by the end of 2020. So that's the claim. And this was the accompanying visualization that summarized the funding across local partners by all of these various different countries in which PEPFAR works. So, we were we came across this visual and it started to get us thinking about how we can create more effective government visualizations and communications. And while this visual maybe never intended to stand alone and be like the sole visual to support this point, it got us thinking too about how we can create visualizations where the key finding and takeaway is more apparent to the audience and more direct, and a simplified visual that can actually drive some of those key insights rather than having to look through it yourself. So I guess just a question to pose to this audience, as you're looking at this visual, does the key conclusion of transitioning the majority of our local funding or our funding to local partners stand out to you? So I'll just pose this to the group. I would love to hear any observations or insights that this makes you think of. Do you think that this is an effective visualization to support that point? Open the floor. Feel free to come off mute if you'd like, or just throw some ideas in the chat. And I actually can't see the chat, so feel free to just let me know if anyone is chatting in there. So as we're waiting, okay, I see one. Would be easier to read if it was sorted by percentages rather than alphabetically. Absolutely. So the default is just sorted in alphabetical order by countries. And so it's really difficult to immediately see, okay, what are the countries that have actually met this goal? How many countries are on track to meeting this goal? You kind of have to look through it to find those. Another observation that we had was just there's a lot of text on this chart, right? There's lots of labels. And it can make it a little difficult to your eye to immediately catch what the key takeaway is. So you have to look through to see that there is a couple of countries that are above the 70% threshold. You have to look for the 70% threshold, etc. So there's lots of different ways that we can improve this visual and make it more effective such that, immediately we're able to see the key takeaway from this visualization. So that's what we're going to talk to you about today. I'm going to hand it off to Lemlem to do some of the intro, taking us through some of the data preparation that is needed to even get us started to start making these enhancements in ggplot.
Thanks, Karishma. Now that we've come to a consensus that this visual could use some revamping, we're going to demo what that process would actually look like in R. So if we could scroll down. Okay, to start, we're going to prepare our RStudio workspace by installing and loading the necessary R packages in order to kind of munge and visualize the data that we're referring to. So hopefully some of these packages look familiar, such as Tidyverse, which contains a collection of R packages for data manipulation and visualization. If you're not familiar, I encourage you to explore the book R for Data Science as it goes into detail. And there's also a link to some of that information here as well. We also have a custom package designed by our team called Glitter, and that contains custom colors that we typically use for standardizing our plots. So you'll see that referenced here. And then we won't spend too much time on these, but also using the scales package to format numerical data, the glue package to create and insert dynamic text, GT and GT extras for creating custom tables, and then system fonts to register custom fonts. So if you were to run through this exercise, we would recommend you do this within an RStudio project. But again, this is more just a demo of how that would go. But essentially, a project would help kind of contain all this information. And you can kind of see us referencing Revolutionaries, which is the project that we carried this out in. So now that we have the required packages, you can scroll down. Yeah, so now that we have the required packages, we can kind of work on loading the PEPFAR data. So if we go up a little bit, you'll see just us loading that data in where you see read CSV. Essentially, either you can call it from the repo or you can load it locally on your device. But essentially, reading in the CSV will pull in that data set. Okay, so if we look at the codebook, sorry, if we go up a little bit. Yeah, so just to familiarize ourselves with the data set that we're referring to, so we're working with this PEPFAR data set. Some variables that we want to consider is the operating unit. So in the context of PEPFAR, that refers to the countries that we're going to be looking at. And then you also see operating unit long, which will have the full names of the countries. So in the operating unit, we abbreviated them. So for example, DRC would be Democratic Republic of Congo. And then we're also going to have local and international to refer to the local partners as well as international partners. And then we're going to have the goal, which will refer to whether a country has exceeded 70%, which is the threshold that we're going to be continuously referring to throughout this. So now that we have a working knowledge of the data set, we can kind of inspect that data using functions like glimpse, which if you look a little bit further up, you'll see that in use here. But also you can use functions like GT tables to kind of create this table in the GT preview, right? So we're calling in the data frame, and then we're using GT and GT themes to kind of create this cleaned up table that you can kind of see the information in, right? So you have your operating unit long, local, international, and the goals that we referred to. Okay, so if you recall, our goal is to recreate the stacked bar graph showcasing local versus international budget shares. So our next step will be to kind of convert the data into a long format for easier plotting. So with one column for the funding type, which would be local versus international, another for the share of funding. So we'll do this by creating a new data set. So you'll see that being referenced, df long, and then we're going to kind of move into pivoting that data. So you'll see the function pivot longer, and then we're calling in what we want to pivot. So that would be the local international, and we're going to make that long. We also want to define the color assignments to the funding types. So you're going to see in the top part of this, there's hex colors being referred to. So we're defining this blue and orange by calling in these hex colors, which are Excel default colors. And then later on, you'll see the mutate function where we're actually we're creating a fill color column and then assigning those colors. So you'll see local is being assigned hex blue, and then what's remaining is hex orange. So that would be for international. And then just for some naming convention, we renamed them earlier on. But now you can kind of see this cleaned up version, right, in the GT tables. So we have our OU, our goals, our type, and our share, and then the fill color assignment that we just created. So now that we've prepped the data, we can kind of work on creating a stacked bar graph to visualize the share of funding by operating unit. So using ggplot GM column, we're going to start building the stacked bar plot with position stack. So you can kind of see that on the fourth line here. And that'll help us arrange the bars in the correct order that we want. And then once we've done that, we're also able to kind of start customizing. So you'll see scale fill identity, which actually applies the predefined colors and adding titles to kind of remove some of the axis labels within the labs function as well. So again, now you can kind of see in the plot, we've kind of created essentially a remake of what we showed you earlier on. So now that we've kind of gotten to this familiar stage of recreating the original visual, we're about 90% there, right? So the final step really is kind of matching the original plot by adding the percentage labels on the bars for clarity. So we can do this by using GM label. Yeah, so you can kind of see here GM labels in use, and that places the share of funding values on top of their respective sections in the stacked bar plot. Within this step, we can kind of see some customization happening to kind of match the visualization style. And so you're going to see the scales percent, which actually creates the percentages that we want instead of just having the decimals, and then some sizing as well. And so now, voila, we've kind of come back to this original version. And so now we can kind of start thinking of how maybe we want to remake this to kind of be improved versus kind of just coming back to the original version that we have. So I'll pass back to Karishma to walk us through how we maybe want to remake this visual.
Thank you so much, Lemlem. Okay, awesome. So now we have a working visual that matches what we had seen in Excel and in the original report. And so now we can start introducing some of those key data visualization principles that we had talked through earlier. One of the first things that Morgan actually mentioned in the chat was it'd be much more helpful to sort our data in a meaningful way rather than alphabetically. So for the first step in the remake, we want to actually sort the data rather than alphabetically by the local partner share instead. So here you can see most, if you were to just like look and have an imaginary threshold here at 50%, most of our countries and operating units are below this 50% threshold. So we know we want to focus on what the goal line is, the 70% threshold. So we're going to first go through and sort all of these countries by the local share. So what you see here in blue. So we want to take the plot from something like this to something like this. And how do we do that? We actually end up creating a factor in our data frame before we pass it into ggplot to refactor the operating unit variable in our data frame and then pull that into ggplot instead. So here you can see we're working with df long, which is the data frame we were working with earlier, and we're creating a new factorized version of OU. So the first thing we're doing is we're saying, I want to grab the share value for when the type is equal to local and set that equal to LP value. And also, sorry, just want to say at any point, if anyone has questions or, anything isn't making sense, please feel free to raise your hand or throw something in the chat and we'd be happy to stop and revisit this because these all build on each other. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go through this. So once we create an LP value, we then use that as our ordering for factor reorder. So for those of you who might not be familiar, factors allow us to overwrite what a categorical variable is into a categorical variable with leveled groups. And so here what we're doing is we're we're reassigning OU to itself, but we're reordering it by the local partner value, and we're removing anything that has NAs. And so by overwriting this and releveling these, we can then use this new factor rather than the regular OU that defaults to being sorted in alphabetical order, to sort in ggplot by this value instead. The other thing we know we want to do is, you saw earlier that in this visual, we have a total value right here. You can kind of see it's a little small. And so we don't want total to get buried and sorted. We want that to come up as the top because that's our overall local partner share that we want to see. So instead, what we do here is after we've created a factor, we re-level these manually and say, if OU is equal to total, move that to the top of the factor list, regardless of where it actually falls in its local partner value. And then we sort these by the factor using a range. And so once we've done that, our ggplot code is going to look really similar. We're just going to continue to pass in OU for the Y and share for the X. But instead now, since we're using our new data frame, we're using the factor column as our Y-axis rather than just the regular OU. And then as Lemlem took us through this, we have our labels to add some text. Our geom call is going to create the stacked bar. And then our labs is going to create the title. And this is where we're bringing in our colors with scale fill identity. And finally, we end up with something that looks like this, where total is sitting at the top. And then the rest of these bars are sorted by local partner share. Great. And so the next step, and one of the common principles that we try to do in our office, and one of like a key data visualization principle, is to try to get your plot in order correctly first in black and white, and then add color strategically as needed. So oftentimes, you know, oh yeah.
Hi, sorry for disturbing. I wanted to know in the code before, in the plot, did you use any of the functions from the glitter package?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Yes, I'll let you know when we use it. We end up using it for styling later on and for pulling in the particular color. But thank you. That's a good thing to highlight. So all of these are actually functions within the tidyverse in this case, where the mutate and the arrange comes in from the tidyverse. And then the rest of these are all ggplot, with the exception here of scales, which is formatting our labels to be percentages. And that's also a standard package that you can find on CRAN. So, okay, the next step is color, right? And we often like see color be overused sometimes. So one of the things that we try to do is just get our plot configured in black and white and then figure out how we want to manually recolor afterwards. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this chart as is, and we're going to just shift it back over to a grayscale. So we'll remove these standard Excel colors that we brought in earlier, and we want to take it to something that looks like this, just to get us started. And so how we do that is we will often, instead of, you know, pulling them in ggplot, we'll create a fill color column in our data frame that we then use later on in our code. So here what you're seeing, we're passing in a new data frame again, and we're creating a new fill color variable. And what we're doing here is we're saying when the type is equal to local, use this gray 90K variable. And I think this is actually, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, this might be from glitter. But it's just a dark gray. And then for everything else, make it gray 30K. So for local, make it the dark gray, and then for everything else, make it light gray. And so once we've created this new data frame, we're just going to pass in that same fill color variable to our fill. And we use scale fill identity to tell ggplot that we want it to use the actual values that are stored in this column, these hex colors, as the colors in the categories in our data frame. So instead of, you know, just coloring them by two different groups, we want them to actually use the identity of the cells in the data frame. And so that's all that's changed here. The code is actually exactly the same, but we have just changed what colors are coming in, and we're able to just switch out the way that this is colored. Alrighty, so now that we have that, we can start to think about other ways that this plot is starting to feel a little cluttered. So as some of you may have noticed, all of these, they're all kind of summing to one, right? We have local partner share and international partner share. And if you add them together, it's going to be equal to 100%. And so often, we see excessive labeling occur, right? Where if you look at, let's just take this top one, Rwanda, 85% of their funding is with the local partners. And so you can kind of intuitively understand that the remaining share, the 15%, is with international partners. So we can actually declutter this visual a little bit, remove unnecessary labels, so that we can focus some of the attention of the viewer immediately, rather than kind of being distracted by all of the different labels that are occurring. So in the spirit of decluttering, which is another data visualization principle, we want to take our plot for something like this to something like this, where we're just stripping the labels out for right now, and we can add them in strategically later. And how we do so is just to remove that geom label that we added earlier. Alrighty, last bit here is, I kind of alluded to this in the previous section, but if both of these bars are adding up to 100, and the labels don't add value to have both of them here, in fact, they're quite distracting, what we can actually do is we can drop the labels, and we can also drop these extra bars that sum to 100, since we know that every single one is going to. So in doing so, the eye can intuitively understand that there is some percentage that's making up the rest of that 85%. And so we can remove these extra light gray bars and soften up the labels of the geom text to just label what's on the local partner share. And so then you can figure out, okay, if 85% is for local, 15% will be for international, without actually having to state it and adding more clutter to your plot. So we want to take it from something that like this, to something like this, where we've dropped those extra bars, we've added text, but in a little bit of a softer way using a geom text. And we've added color strategically to just color the local partner share. So the elements of the code that have done this are the following. We're filtering specifically now before we even move into ggplot for type equals local. So we're only going to show that bar. Same thing here, we're just showing OU as the Y, which is our factor, and share as the X. And since we don't have two groups, we don't have to do a position stack and have a stacked bar chart. We're using geom call, which is creating this bar and filling it with the color, that red that you saw. That red is also stored in glitter, but we just used the hex code here, so anyone can use this code. And then finally, instead of using geom label, we're using geom text, which is a little bit softer because it doesn't have that white box and padding around it. And we're saying, add the label and make it, format it as a percentage and round it to 1 decimal point. And so, same thing here, we're creating, rather than just having the decimal come in, we are making it a percentage, we're formatting the size, and then adding a title. And that gets us to this plot. So we've gone a substantial way from where we started, but we do have more enhancements to go. So I will pass it off to Lemlem for the final tweaks and some of the aesthetics that can be built in.
Thanks, Karishma. So keeping in mind the USAID local partners goal of 70%, a question just for you guys to consider and maybe answer in the chat is, how can we break up our data into more digestible chunks? So again, if we're looking at the desired plot, right, how can we kind of break this information up? I guess, spoiler alert, we will be faceting. And that's essentially, we're going to start grouping the operating units in 2 categories. So you can kind of see that here, where we're grouping the total. We have total as its own versus above 70% and below 70%. So this will help us create a cleaner and more focused view of the data. And then if we toggle over to the munge code, we can see that we're going to start pulling in this data set. Okay, so you can kind of see here, right, we're pulling in the DF long ordered, filtering for local partners, and then we're going to start creating this facet order. So in the case 1 assignment, we're essentially stating that for OUs where there's a total, we're going to have this string variable so just an empty string assignment. And then if the goal is equal to 1, we're going to assign this to be greater than 70%. And then whatever's remaining is going to be less than 70%. So this is essentially the grouping that we're referring to for this facet. This allows us to kind of create different groups based on whether the unit meets or exceeds the threshold that we're referencing. So then after that, you can kind of see we're using facet relevel to reorder the levels of the facet order. So this helps the facets appear in the specific order that we want, right? So it'll have the total first, then those that are above 70%, and then those that are below 70%. And then finally in the mutate, you're kind of seeing us bring back this color assignment. So again, assigning the total, this specific shade of dark red. And then we have goal for those that are above 70%. It's a shade of, I think, a lighter red. And then for those that are less than 10%, it's a lighter pink, I think. And then any default remaining would be this gray color that we're setting. So that's from the glitter package, gray 20K. So then if we toggle to the plot code, we can kind of see this P6 that we're referring to. This will kind of display the bars for each OU, showing their local budget share. So in geom call, you're going to see us using that fill color that we created. So again, calling recolor, and that'll have the color assignment that we referred to. But then again, to actually apply that, let's see. Yeah, we have scale fill identity. So that's actually applying the color assignment that we're referring to in the geom call. And then you're also going to see geom text. So that adds text labels to the plot to show percentage representation. So we're calling that in within the label, and then adjusting size and just the positioning with there. And then after that, you'll see the labs function. So then we're going to add in some informative title, removing the axis labels and legend. And then the scale X continuous, that is just kind of slightly adjusting the limits of the X-axis. So again, just noting that we're slightly extending the upper limit to be slightly above 100%. And then finally, I think I didn't reference it, but the geom line, that's I think second to top, yeah. That's an important thing to note because that helps create a vertical line, which is the 70% threshold that we're going to help indicate whether they've met or exceeded the goal. Oh, and then we have our facet grid. So that actually creates the grouping that we're referring to, and then we're creating the free Y. So that'll just have it not be the same for each one. So I think it's easier to see this versus discuss it, but now you can kind of see it coming together, right? So we have our facet grouping where we have the total at the top, those that are above 70% in this second section with the color assignment, and then this last section for those that are less than 70%. So again, just an easier way to kind of read through the operating units and seeing where they fall when it comes to the threshold. So now that we've kind of gone through faceting, there's still an additional step that we can consider, and that's kind of removing any unnecessary elements. So I guess if you're familiar with the term chart junk, but that essentially kind of removes any competing elements that are kind of taking up our attention, right? So some things that you kind of see circled here are the labels from the facets, as well as if we want to maintain the ticks from the x-axis, because again, these can kind of be additional cluttering pieces that maybe we want to remove, as well as the background. So if we toggle over to the code, we can kind of see how we're going to approach this. So some elements that I want to highlight here are within the themes. I think that kind of shows a big chunk of how we're going to start cleaning this up. So you're going to kind of see this element blank function. And essentially what that does is kind of remove anything that you're referring to. So there are several things that it looks like we're removing here from the strip background. So that'll clean up the background of the actual plot. Then the strip text, so that'll remove any text from the facets. So you'll kind of see the actual facets being removed. The text being removed, and then you're also going to see the x-axis text being removed as well. And then we're adjusting the size of the y-axis text, so increasing the operating unit size of titles. And so you can kind of see all that coming together, right? So now it just looks slightly cleaner. We've removed those facet labels, the text as well, the x-axis, yeah, the x-axis ticks, and then just the background is being removed. So all of this is kind of a cleaner visual from what we originally had. Oh, and then yeah, one thing to highlight is, again, I think you guys asked about where are the functions coming in from the glitter package. And so this is one that's important to note, the SI style Y line. So that specifically is applying a default theme that's specific to SI. So it just kind of standardizes how the plot looks. So I think before you had the default where it's kind of slightly gray and you see all the lines being incorporated. And so this simplifies it. And now you only have the Y line axis being used. So now we can kind of consider what annotation that we want to start incorporating in. So now that we've simplified the plot, it's time to kind of add these finishing touches, cleaning up the edges of the plot and adding an annotation to make it more accessible and informative. So this can kind of be done by incorporating titles and supporting text that can kind of convey the message that we want. So at this stage is kind of thinking through, what is our takeaway message? What are the findings that we're getting from this visual that we've now created? So if we toggle to the code, you'll see several uses of geom text. And so essentially what that is doing is kind of annotating key parts of the plot rather than using additional axes or labels. And then also using the coordinate Cartesian to kind of allow text annotations to be placed outside of the standard plot area if needed. And that'll kind of reduce any white space that we have. And again, I think this is easier to see, but essentially these functions kind of contribute to kind of creating a cleaner and more focused viz. So again, all of this annotation that you're seeing from the title to what's on the right-hand side in the font and the colored font as well, that all just kind of indicates part of the message that we want here, right? So again, highlighting, those that are above 70%, and then as well as indicating those that are falling below the goal that we have from our threshold. So all of these functions, again, contribute to just creating a more cleaner and more focused viz, kind of emphasizing the most important parts of the data points. But again, this kind of just requires taking a look at the visual and kind of seeing what is the takeaway message that we want here. And so in this case, we've decided on this title, and it's an FY21. 4 operating units had achieved the USAID local partner budget share goal of 70%. And again, I think that's really clear, right? Because we can kind of see those that are highlighted in this bolder red. We have a message to kind of annotate that information as well. And you're seeing, again, that threshold line in those that are falling below. So again, I think this is a nice use of kind of bringing all this together and seeing how the message can kind of be shown and not, necessarily be just written out. So I'll pass back to Karishma for any additional comments. But again, we can also transition into Q&A. So anyone with questions can feel free to drop those in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lemlem. Yeah, and it's really, this is one small example of how you can go from something that looks like this to something that, bakes in what that data-driven insight is right away and has used data visualization principles to really elevate that that message out to the key to immediately see when you look at the visual. So that's our exercise for today. I would love to open it up to any questions or comments that anyone has. In particular, this is one example of a remake that we have done in our office. But we do this kind of work day in and day out, and would love to hear about how, in your line of work, what are other opportunities to apply some of these data visualization principles? How can this be leveraged to improve, the efficacy and the effectiveness of communications across various different types of work? So we'll open the floor and looking forward to discussing.
Thank you so much, Lemlem and Karishma. I've got a question. Do you sometimes use 2 different plots well, not at the same time, but if you do have 2 different plots, can you put them together in one plot? And if you do, what packages do you use? Or do you have a favorite one or one that works best?
That's a
because I
great question.
find okay, yeah, yes.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
No, because I was gonna I normally find using the cow plot a lot. If I find the cow plot package normally puts all the plots together, but with the patchwork, not so much.
Yeah, so we mostly use patchwork. I have not had a ton of success with CowPlot, honestly. But we love using patchwork. And so what you can do with patchwork is you can store separate plots, and you can decide, I want to put them next to each other. 50% of the screen goes to this one, 50% goes to this one, or you can put them and stack them on top of each other. And the nice thing is you can sort of change the way that the layout is. So if you want one to like take up 2/3 of the space versus 1/3, you can use a function within Patchwork called plot layouts or plot widths. And yes, so it's like plot layout, and then you have heights and widths that you can customize. So that's what we use in our office. And you can also annotate them as well. So I think Lemlem and Tim have both shared that in the chat.
Okay. All right. The link that Lemlem shared, is it the latest version of the patchwork?
Looks like it. I
I
think so.
think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I
And
want to say yes.
And what Tim actually just said, with the newest version of Patchwork, you can also add GT objects together, which is really cool because I don't think we were not able to do that before. So you can have a visual and a table patchwork together at the same time.
Oh, okay. Do we have any more questions, comments, suggestions from our participants? Aaron, do you have anything to add?
No, patchwork is really, we spent a lot of time putting graphs together that way, or different pieces of information. So the addition of GT really is a nice thing.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Lemlem. Thank you, Karishma. I don't know if Aaron says he doesn't have anything more to add. I don't know if Tim has anything more to add. If not, are you guys comfortable sharing your contacts if anyone wants to reach out to you?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah, that works.
All right. All right. If you could quickly share it in the chat as well. And in the meantime, I just want to share recordings from you guys' positive talks from 2022 to 2024. I don't know if anyone is aware of them. I've watched them. They're pretty impressive. You guys do a lot of data visualizations. Do you guys actually show stakeholders like the different countries, Botswana, Angola? Do you show them these plots that you've created? Use them in meetings, or you just use them for?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, we create communications across like various different metrics, and a lot of it is, working with specific countries and their country data and reporting it back to them, working with them to visualize it in a more strategic way, working with some of the visualizations that they have, etc. So it's a lot of collaboration. And Lemlem actually works pretty closely with the Botswana team, so feel free to add anything else there. But it's a wonderful collaboration, and it's great. There's so much talent in our office and all of these different teams, so it's a wonderful place to learn.
Yeah, no, thanks for that plug, Karishma. I do work closely with the Botswana team, and so it's kind of nice to plug in and use R where applicable, but also recognizing the teams may be using other softwares. But it is a nice addition to some of the work because it does help kind of streamline and kind of automate.
All right. Okay. Do you guys have a recording of a glitter package tutorial?
I don't think we have one recorded. There's a few vignettes that you can browse through on the webpage that was linked before, and I can reshare that link that kind of walks through how to use it. So I think that, and I think we do a pretty decent job laying out kind of how to use each of these. The help files are pretty useful too. But if there are things that aren't making sense from that, feel free as always to add an issue in GitHub as GitHub issues, and we'll track that and we can adjust.
Nice. Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Anyone else has any questions, suggestions, comments? Okay, I think everyone is satisfied with the talk. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Aaron, Lemlem, Karishma, Tim, you guys have been great. And for everyone who's still here, next month we're having another meetup on I think it's the 14th or the 9th of December. That'll be our last meetup for the year. We have Dr. Gwen. She'll be talking about how she uses R for research. Just posted the meetup link there. And I think if we are okay, I think we're done for today. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
And
us.
we'll share out, some resources as well. But thank you so much for having us.
All
Take
right.
care,
And
everybody.
Thank you.
once the YouTube once the recording has been uploaded to YouTube, I'm going to send everyone all the participants, and you'll get them.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.